Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
Dear students, congratulations to all who have cleared the prelims 2020. Now, without any delay, you should start focusing on upcoming mains examination. We all know that right now the focus areas should be revision and answer writing practice in all the important themes of GS mains, with of course special emphasis on essay paper as well as GS4 ethics and integrity. Then the focus should be on attempting GS mains full length tests and revision and answer writing practice in optional subject. For the first two action points, Rouse IAS is inviting all its current as well as ex-students as well as our DNS followers who have cleared prelims 2020 to start with General Studies main test series and quality improvement program for mains 2020. Now the GS MTS and QIP 2020 as it's known, this program will help you first revise all important themes for upcoming mains 2020. For this, there shall be mains compass which will be subject wise compilations as well as quality improvement program classes, which shall cover all the important topics of static as well as current affairs from the last 1 year. This program will do extensive answer writing practice in all important themes of GS paper 1, 2, 3, 4 as well as essay paper in QIP classes. Then this program will fine-tune your answer writing approach through rigorous testing, sample answers, evaluation and personal mentorship from the teachers. And so, the features of the QIP MTS program 2020 shall be answer writing and test discussion via live online classes of around 100 hours, thematic tests around 10, 12 full-length tests and 2 essay tests, sample answers within word limit shall be provided, evaluation shall be given within time limits, and personal mentorship shall also be provided for the mains tests. Now the fees for our MTS and QIP 2020 course is 30,000 rupees. But this course is complimentary for all the current students of our Rouse IAS, and the course is available at only 5,500 rupees for those who have cleared prelims 2020. Now this 5,500 fee is applicable to Rouse ex-students as well as DNS followers who have cleared the prelims examination. Let us work to give mains 2020 your best shot. Rouse IAS Study Circle is with you as always.
Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we will be covering the important news appearing in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper, dated 29th October 2020. The topics to be discussed are reflected on your screen and the time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's begin. Dear all, in our weekly series of the main question assignment from the DNS, the question for today's assignment is: despite being the apex institution for environmental justice, the National Green Tribunal suffers from various limitations. In the light of the above statement, highlight the various challenges faced by the NGT in its functioning in 150 words. Now this question has been created from the DNS of 19th October 2020 from the discussion titled National Green Tribunal. You may watch the discussion before writing your answer. In the description of the video, there is a link for the question assignment where you can participate in the discussion on Rouse IAS eLearn platform. Please find the link of the question which has been uploaded today as the main weekly question. Now this news is an editorial which has appeared on page number 6 and it is titled Countering Deepfakes, the Most Serious Artificial Intelligence Threat. Now basically in this article, the author is talking about deepfakes and how it is the need of the hour to enhance the media literacy, come up with more efficient and meaningful platform policies, as well as to also have a certain kind of regulatory framework which ensures that artificial intelligence cannot be misused. Now the topic of deepfake, particularly in the larger context of artificial intelligence, is very important from the mains perspective. It is important for GS paper 2 under governance as far as cyber crimes are concerned, and is also very important from the perspective of GS paper 3 under the category of awareness in the field of IT, space, computers, etc., as well as science and technology, its development and application, as well as effect in everyday life. Now, as far as background of deep fake or artificial intelligence is concerned, we all know that today we are stepping into an age of artificial intelligence where later, if not sooner, machines and computers might control every aspect of our lives. Now, since we are talking about artificial technology, before we delve into the article, you should know what artificial intelligence. So, you should know what artificial intelligence actually means. Now, artificial intelligence or AI basically involves using computers to perform such tasks which require certain kind of human intelligence for their execution. And examples of such tasks would be taking decisions or recognizing some kind of text, speech, or visual images. Now, keep in mind that sometimes in mains perspective, especially in GS paper 3, the question may directly ask you to define what is artificial intelligence. So, at least in your own language, in 2-3 lines, you should know what artificial intelligence is. Now, this term deepfake has been derived from two words. The two words are deep learning plus fake. Hence, when you combine both, you get what is known as deepfake. Now, the origin of this word deepfake can be traced back to the year 2017 when a Reddit user made an account with the username deepfake and was posting explicit videos of certain celebrities. However, the story did not end there. Last year and even in the beginning of this year as well, the cybercrime officials in India were very busy tracking certain kind of applications such as FaceApp, which uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to produce such deepfakes. So the question which comes into mind is, what exactly is a deepfake? Now, deepfake is basically a technique which uses artificial intelligence. So you can say deepfake is either an artificial intelligence software, an application, or a certain kind of algorithm which basically superimposes certain kind of digital composite on an already existing video, audio, or any other kind of media, which in very simple language means that deepfakes are fake videos or audio recordings that look and sound exactly like a real thing. Now, you all know that the act of faking content is not new. However, what makes deepfake so interesting or rather different than other kind of fake content is that deepfake uses technologies such as machine learning as well as artificial intelligence to manipulate or generate visual and audio content which has a high potential to deceive. Hence, deepfake is created by machine learning models which also train certain kind of generative neural network architectures which are then used to manipulate voices and looks. Now, what is a generative neural network architecture is very technical. You do not need to know the exact thing. However, if you can remember this term neural network, it will add a certain kind of weight to your answer. So this model of machine learning basically analyzes a video footage until it is algorithmically able to transpose the skin of one human face onto the movements of another. Now take this picture here for example. Here is the real picture. This picture is of Elon Musk. And on the other hand, we have a deep fake or a fake picture of him. So you see there's a lot of similarity between these two pictures. Now a lot of you may say that you're able to differentiate, but please realize that for a lot of users, they view content in very low resolution. So imagine if you're looking at both these pictures in low resolution, you won't be able to differentiate the real one from the fake one. Now, though this deepfake first originated in the year 2017, however, in the last 1 year or so, its usage has been increased. And the reason for it is very simple. Today, we have much more easier access to commodity cloud computing. We have various apps which provide us with algorithms. And we also have abundant data which we can mine to create such kind of deepfakes. Now, the author in this article has mentioned the demerits as well as threats related to such deepfakes. The first demerit or threat of deepfake is that they make it possible to fabricate information and media. Swap faces, lip syncing, puppeteering, etc. All such kind of technologies are used and mostly without our consent. And if misused, these technologies can bring threat to psychology, security, political stability, as well as business disruption. Secondly, this technology can be used against women. Now, in fact, the very first case of a malicious use of a deepfake was seen in pornography, which inflicted emotional, reputational, as well as in some cases, violence towards the individuals. So, it is not common for us to find deepfakes of celebrity, and for that matter, now even of ordinary people, especially women, being circulated in the media. In fact, pornographic deepfakes can threaten, intimidate, as well as inflict a lot of psychological harm and can simply reduce women to being as sexual objects. The third threat of deepfake is to the internal security of our country. Now, a deepfake can act as a very powerful tool to undermine the public safety as well as create a certain kind of uncertainty and chaos in the target country. So, deepfake can be used to spread communal propaganda. For example, you can always deepfake a politician's statement or his video, and then that deepfake would spark a communal riot. Furthermore, this deepfake can also be used by insurgent groups as well as terrorist organizations, where they can use deepfake to show that their enemies are giving certain kind of inflammatory speeches or are engaging in provocative action, and then this can stir up anti-state sentiments amongst people. Fourthly, deepfake can also be used to undermine the democracy of our country. Now, this can be done in two ways. First is by undermining a discourse. Now, a deepfake can be used to alter the democratic discourse and undermine the trust the people have in a democratic institution, and which would eventually lead to impairing the diplomacy. Furthermore, false information about institutions, public policy, or even politicians for that matters can be exploited to spin any kind of story and manipulate a certain kind of belief. Secondly, deepfake can be used to sabotage somebody's image as well. As I spoke earlier, a deepfake of a political candidate can sabotage their image and reputation. Hence, a good quality deepfake can inject compelling false information which can cast a shadow even on the voting process and election results in a democracy. So, these four are the demerits or threats, particularly in relation to deepfake. However, there are certain general challenges also which is associated with artificial intelligence. These include, firstly, is the invasion of privacy, especially in the form of social gradation. Now, governments can use the data to govern through artificial intelligence. It can track people's social media habits. It can introduce policies to police people with the help of face IDs, etc., as is currently done in countries like China. Now, social gradation through artificial intelligence is basically a process where the authorities use artificial intelligence to analyze a person's behavioral pattern. Hence, in a way, it is like a surveillance over the internet. The next challenge of artificial intelligence can be social manipulation. As you all must be knowing, Cambridge Analytica alleged that data from almost 50 million Facebook users was used to sway the outcome of the 2016 US presidential election. Lastly, artificial intelligence, of course, has given rise to various kind of cyber crimes, which include phishing as well as catfish accounts. Now, having discussed the threats as well as the demerits, the author has also given certain suggestions in the form of solutions which can be adopted if we need to tackle the threat of deepfake. The first solution recommended by the author is to adopt a multi stakeholder as well as a multi model approach. He feels that collaborative actions and collective techniques can be used to create legislative regulations, platform policies, as well as technology intervention, which will in turn provide a much more effective and ethical countermeasure to mitigate the threat of malicious deepfakes. Secondly, he talks about media literacy, which is basically the role of media. He says that media literacy for consumers and for journalists too is one of the most effective tools to combat disinformation and deepfake. Hence, effort should be made to cultivate this kind of discipline amongst the media consumers as well as journalists. So, as a consumer of the media, we must have the ability to differentiate, understand, and even use in a proper way the information which we are getting. And similarly, the journalist too, before going ahead and publicizing any kind of video, audio, or any other media, should first check for its authenticity. Thirdly, the author suggests that we need to create certain kinds of regulations. Now, meaningful regulations created by discussing it with the technology industry, civil society, as well as policymakers will help to curb the creation as well as distribution of deepfakes. Furthermore, today we need very easy to use as well as effective technologies which normal people too can use to detect deepfake. Furthermore, people should be educated to have strict privacy settings on their various social media accounts like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, etc. So, very often, when we do not keep our profiles private, it is very easy for anybody on the internet to come access our photos, videos, or any other kind of media. Hence, these were certain threats as well as solutions to counter deepfake. Hence, in conclusion, the author is of the opinion that today, due to the access to synthetic media technology, the risk of exploitation has also increased manifold. Deepfakes can be used to damage reputation, fabricate evidence, as well as defraud the public and undermine the trust in democratic institutions. And therefore, to counter the menace of deepfake, we all must take the responsibility to be a very critical consumer of media on the internet. And before we share anything on the social media, we must pause and think before doing so. Now, based on our discussion of this article, please try and attempt this mains practice question. With this, let's take up our next news. This news appears as a lead article on page number 6, titled The Challenges of Walking the Indo-Pacific Talk. Now, basically, what the author is trying to tell us in this article is that with the rise of the geopolitical importance of China, India's foreign policy has also shifted, and India is now focusing more on strategic and military considerations. Now, this change in focus of India can be well ascertained by looking at India's alliance with the United States of America, as well as India's new and renowned focus on the Indo-Pacific as well as on the quadrilateral security dialogue. However, the author feels that there is a certain difference between Indo-Pacific and the quadrilateral grouping, and it is in this background of the difference between the two that the author has highlighted what are the probable hurdles in India's strategy as far as India's engagement with the Indo-Pacific and the quadrilateral grouping is concerned. Hence, in this article, we will try to understand the issues faced by India and also what can be India's approach to clearly outline its interest in the Indo-Pacific as well as in the Quad. Now, this topic is important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 under the category of international relations, especially bilateral relations of India. Now, before talking about the difference between Indo-Pacific and the Quad, let us first talk about the similarity between the two. The two major similarities between the two is that the Quad members, that is India, USA, Japan and Australia, these Quad members are important Indo-Pacific states and players as well. So it basically means that the Quad is basically a subset of the Indo-Pacific. Furthermore, both the Quad and the Indo-Pacific basically focuses on China, rather more so on countering China. Now, coming to the difference between Indo-Pacific and the Quad, the first major difference is that the Indo-Pacific is basically a politico-economic vision which encompasses the entire Indo-Pacific region and has political and economic vision on its agenda. On the other hand, the Quad is a forum for strategic and military consultation between the four countries. Hence, the focus of Indo-Pacific is more political and economic, whereas the focus of the Quad is more military in nature. The second difference between the two is in the sense of the degree to which they impose China. Now, the Indo Pacific, of course, is a larger forum and its vision too is broader as compared to the Quad. Now, the Indo Pacific provides certain kind of political and economic challenge to China. Whereas the Quad, on the other hand, is inherently very anti China in sentiment. So, the main difference is in terms of the degree of opposition to China, where the Indo Pacific is less opposed to China as compared to the Quad, because Indo-China wants to challenge China politically and or economic grounds. However, the Quad has a much more inherent disliking towards China and wants to check its growing influence come what may. However, please note here that the basic aim or the main purpose for which Quad came into being was to counter China. Hence, how successful or how well Quad is working actually depends upon China only. Because the more aggressive China will get, the more aggressive Quad will get in order to counter China. So, the more aggressive China is, the more stronger the Quad will get. However, this is not the case with the Indo Pacific. Of course, Indo Pacific also does want to control and challenge China. However, challenging China is not its only agenda. Now, coming to the hurdles in India's strategy, especially with the Indo Pacific, the author is of the opinion that for a political economic construct such as the Indo Pacific, it requires very strong economic partnership as well as linkages to survive. And military or strategic cooperation alone is not enough. Furthermore, India has refused to join the RCEP, which is this region's, that is the Indo Pacific's, flagship free trade agreement. And this can potentially complicate India's future engagement with the Indo Pacific. Now, though we understand that it was certain kind of economic realities that discouraged India from engaging in the RCEP, the biggest of them being the huge gap between India and China as far as these respective countries trade with the Indo-Pacific countries is concerned, which basically means that China's trade with the Indo-Pacific countries is a lot more than what India has with these Indo-Pacific countries. So obviously what was benefiting China in the RCEP was not benefiting India. And not just India's refusal to join RCEP, this growing trade gap that India and China have with these countries is also one of the major determining factors which will shape the Indo-Pacific's strategic realities in the coming time. Furthermore, currently India has no FTAs with USA, Australia, New Zealand, Maldives, etc. However, on the other hand, China has a free trade agreement with all these countries except for USA. Furthermore, a trilateral free trade agreement negotiation is also going on between China, Japan, and South Korea. Now, here, what you need to pay focus and attention to is that Japan is a Quad member and is very inherently anti China. However, the very fact that these three countries, that is China and Japan as well as South Korea, are negotiating for a trilateral FTA clearly signifies or tell us one thing, that economic compulsions will always overrule the strategic talks. Because as is clearly evident, Japan is very much anti-China. However, Japan has its own economic compulsion. Hence, it is this economic compulsion of these countries which will go a very long way in shaping the strategic realities for a variety of reasons. Because it is one thing to say that we oppose China, especially as far as strategic or military consideration is concerned. However, given the fact that China is one of the most important players globally as far as trade is concerned, it is very difficult for any country to ignore China's presence. Hence, what is required is that strategic talks have to be aligned with the economic realities for the success of the Indo-Pacific. Now, not just on the trade side, even as far as military engagement is concerned, India is far behind China. Now, China is one of the major defense suppliers to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, etc. However, on the other hand, India lags far behind China as it has minimal sales, defense dialogues, or even very few occasional joint military exercise in this Indo-Pacific region. Hence, the way forward is the opposite of the hurdles. That is, India needs to bolster or strengthen its economic partnership, especially with the member states of the Indo-Pacific, and it also needs to increase its military engagement in this region. Now, based on our discussion, please try and attempt this mains practice question. With this, let's take up our next news. Now, this next news appears on page number 14, titled UK to Partner for Developing Gift City Funding Infrastructure Pipeline. Now, recently, India and the United Kingdom concluded the 10th round of UK-India Economic and Financial Dialogue. And one of the most important highlight of this dialogue was that United Kingdom has pledged to support India's national infrastructure pipeline, and UK and India have signed a partnership on infrastructure financing. Now, this national infrastructure pipeline is very important from the perspective of prelims. Now, in his 2019 Independence Day speech, Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlighted that more than 100 lakh crore rupees have been earmarked to be invested into infrastructure projects over the next 5 years, and this would include both social as well as economic infrastructure. I guess this year's budget has increased the allocation to 111 lakh crores. The exact figure is not important, but do remember that it is more than 100 lakh crore. Furthermore, as far as the sector-wise breakup project capital expenditure is concerned, out of the total money of the national infrastructure pipeline, almost 24% of it will be invested in the energy sector. So the sector of energy gets the highest weightage, followed by road, railways, etc. As far as the funding is concerned, the funding will be shared by center, state as well as the private sector in the ratio of 39 is to 22, which means that center and the state government will contribute 39% and 39%, whereas the private sector will contribute 22%. Furthermore, a UK-India Development Cooperation Fund has also been set up, and this will function as a funds of fund. This fund of fund will be managed by SBI, and it is this fund which will serve as the financial as well as the accounting platform for United Kingdom's government's future development capital investment in India. Now, let us quickly understand what exactly is a fund of funds. Now, a fund of fund or the father fund is basically a fund which makes indirect investment in various sectors. For example, startup, electronic manufacturing, MSME, etc. So what you need to remember here is that a fund of fund makes indirect investment and not direct investment. For example, the government of India has set up a fund of fund for various startup companies. Now what happens is that this fund of fund will indirectly invest in some alternate investment fund which will be registered with the SEBI, and it is this alternate investment fund which will fund the startup companies. So here the fund of funds, which is known as the father fund, will invest in the daughter fund, and it is this daughter fund which will directly then invest in the equities of startup companies. Similarly, the Government of India has also set up an electronics development fund as a fund of fund for development of electronic manufacturing industries. Lastly, as far as the gift city is concerned, now Section 18 of the Special Economic Zones Act authorizes the central government of our country to set up an international financial service center in a special economic zone. And it is this gift city located in Gandhinagar, Gujarat, that has been established as the first international financial service center of the country. Now, an international financial service center offers world-class business and regulatory environment by charging comparatively less amount of taxes and even by lowering the various compliances which are otherwise required to run a business. Hence, in this way, an international financial service center enables to bring back the financial services and the transactions which is currently carried by Indian corporates but in offshore financial centers. Furthermore, it also allows the overseas branches of various financial institutions to come to India. Now, earlier, what used to happen? Various different sectors, such as the banking sector, the capital market, and the insurance sector, in this gift city were being regulated by different regulators. So, for banking, we had RBI, for insurance, we have the RADI, then for securities, we had SEBI, etc. But this was creating problem. Therefore, the Parliament of India has now passed a bill to set up a unified regulatory authority in the form of International Financial Service Center Authority, which will act as a single regulator for all kind of financial activities happening in the gift city or any other international financial service center in our country for that matter. So this was all about this article. With this, let's take up our next news. Now this news appears on page number 1, titled Green Crackers to make full-fledged Delhi debut. Now this year, Delhi is all set for its full-fledged date with the green crackers this Diwali. Now the Supreme Court in October 2018 banned the sale, use and manufacture of all those crackers which weren't considered green. Bursting of crackers was leading to rise in pollution. And in 2019, the Supreme Court allowed only green crackers to be sold. So basically, the green crackers are those crackers which have the unique property of releasing water vapor or air as a dust suppressant instead of those polluting and harmful gases. And as far as the performance is concerned, they perform like conventional firecrackers as far as their sound is concerned. Now, after the Supreme Court banned, firecrackers could not be loud beyond a limit, and all such firecrackers had to be approved by the Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization, and all of them had to be certified to be free of mercury, arsenic and barium. Now, it was the CSIR's research which led to the development of green crackers, and the CSIR basically focused on two things. One, they wanted to reduce the level of barium nitrate in the traditional crackers, and secondly, they aimed in the later stage to replace the barium nitrate with potassium nitrate, which is less harmful. Now, green crackers are basically of three types, namely SWAS, that is safe water releaser, SAFAL, that is safe minimal aluminium, and STAR, that is the safe thermite cracker. Now, all these three green crackers eliminate the usage of potassium nitrate as well as sulfur, and they also help in the reduction of particulate matter, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. Now, out of the three, it is SAFAL, that is safe minimal aluminium only, which uses minimal quantity of aluminium for the initiation reaction, and it also helps in reducing the particulate matter compared to other commercial crackers. So green crackers are an important part of the environment section and can be important for the prelims. With this, let's take up our next news. This next news has been taken from page number 4, titled Rhino Horn Trade, 7 Kaziranga workers held. Hence in this discussion, we'll be talking about Kaziranga National Park. However, since I have discussed about Kaziranga National Park in detail before, I'll be attaching that previous lecture. Hence, in this regard, let us know a few details about the Kaziranga National Park. Now, the Kaziranga National Park is located in Assam, along the river Brahmaputra in the north and the Karbi Anglong Hills, which border it in the south. Now, Kaziranga was declared as a national park in the year 1974 and was also declared as a tiger reserve in the year 2006. Since the year 1985, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is known for having the largest population of one-horned rhino. In addition to one-horned rhino, Kaziranga is also known to host the Great Five, which is the rhinos, tigers, elephants, wild water buffalo, as well as the swamp deer. In addition to being a national park, Kaziranga has also been recognized as an important bird area by BirdLife International.